Today we're talking about church media risks. I'm hoping that the folks who have signed in here, who have signed in, are actively involved in your churches, um, especially perhaps in the communication area, or are particularly interested in, at least from a safety and a risk standpoint, the activities going on with media. Uh, And today, I am actually the presenter. My name is David Fournier. I'm the manager for marketing and communications here at Adventist Risk Management. And I also serve in communications at my local church as well. So let's get started with our topic today. Let's get going. All right. So, just a little bit about the scope of our project, our topic today. We are talking about media, and the term media has evolved over time. What we're talking about today is particularly website management. Social media is really the hot topic, but also we don't want to forget that a lot of the basic risk concepts that we're talking about may apply to printed materials as well. They are, in fact, a type of media. And if we have extra time at the end, I do want to ask and spend a little time introducing the topic of crisis communication. We don't necessarily have time for a full presentation on that topic today, but I think the same folks who are interested in church media risks will be very interested in addressing crisis communication as well. Just an extra note here, I've put in orange at the bottom of the slide. I am not giving out legal advice. I'm not an attorney. And also, while it may be tempting at times, this is not going to be a discussion of the law. As somebody who makes media myself, I'm a photographer, a filmmaker. It's tempting to sometimes to get into a discussion of what copyright law and licensing law should look like. We're not talking about what it should look like today. We're talking about what it is and how we can best operate within the law to keep our organizations and ourselves safe and operating within good, sound parameters. All right. I really would like to emphasize the upside as we get started. Often a discussion of risk is sort of a gloomy area where we talk about all the things that could possibly go wrong. And while that's very, very important, and we will certainly address the risks very clearly today, I do want us to stay focused on the fact that no matter what it is that we're doing, whatever activity it is that involves some sort of risk, we're doing it for a reason, and we need to stay focused on that reason. Why are we using social media in our churches? Why do churches want to stream their services? Um, why do we use media at all? Why do we have these websites if they cause us risk? Well, let's not forget they are about engaging our congregations, and there are opportunities to do that successfully with media. It's about reaching our community in new ways. And I think there are very few churches who have really tapped into the real potential of their websites and their media channels, especially social media, as far as outreach tools. The natural instinct, of course, is how can this serve us for internal purposes, which is very important as well. But there's a great deal of potential there for outreach. You have the ability to create an online sense of community. The wonderful thing for somebody in marketing and communication is the ability to get immediate feedback. In this industry, you're always looking for feedback. What worked? How do you measure whatever it is that you're doing, all of your activities? How do you measure the response and the reaction to it? What do people think about it? Well, using these social media tools does potentially give you the opportunity to create that immediate feedback loop. It encourages connectivity, additional feedback, and of course, the easy one is it is a promotion platform for events, activities, and programs. You have VBS coming up in the summer. Well, you post that on Facebook, and your church members share that with all their friends, and it goes pretty far, pretty fast, very inexpensively as well. So those are some of the positives, and I think um, those are really important positives. I would like to mention another one. I was at a conference recently, and it was a marketing and communication oriented conference for the insurance industry. So, not a church setting. However, it was amazing how much activity was taking place in the audience via social media. The amount of questions and interactions on Twitter, particularly, about whatever the speaker was presenting. And then the ability to follow up with the speaker and connect with people that you were not friends with or already connected with, but you're using the social media tools like hashtags to be able to follow the same conversations and create new relationships. There is really amazing potential there. And I think that ministry certainly has the ability to capitalize on that as well. A few glossary terms before we get into some of the details here. I'm sure most of you are very familiar with these terms, but just in case anyone isn't, we don't want them to be lost. Cyber. Cyber is a word we attach to a lot of other words, and it basically indicates anything having to do with computers. So you'll have the cybersphere, cyber cafe. Basically, you can attach the word cyber to almost anything. It just denotes having to do with computers. License. A license is permission that defines how something can be used. A license is very, very important, especially as we talk about copyright. Copyright is a law that protects the owner of a creative work. Um, Right of publicity gives an individual the right to control how their identity is used for commercial promotion. This particularly applies to celebrities. I guess it can apply to anyone at some point, but really has to do with a marketable um, personality, like a celebrity. Liability, the state of being responsible for something, especially by law. So when you're liable for something, it means that you are now responsible for that. So if an accident happens on your property, you could be liable for any injuries, right? Brand. Brand is the identity of an organization, and perhaps that's a simplistic way of putting that. And maybe I should have actually moved that to the top. Brand is an incredibly important idea. It is how your organization is perceived by other people. It is how you want it to be perceived. It is the one thing that is incredibly hard to control, and maybe the most important thing about um, that people will interact with as they decide whether they want to become part of or interact with your organization in a positive way. So, for a church, your brand as a church may help influence whether visitors decide they want to come back or not, or if people who attend your evangelistic meetings decide that they are going to make a commitment and join your church. It's a very important idea. All right, so let's get started with cyber risks. Well, let's get started with media risks. But starting off with cyber, um, we are going to be talking about cyber risks, but also how that has to do with litigation discovery. Talk very briefly about that. Identifiable information and photos of minors, the risks involved. Churches' ministries are so often oriented around youth ministries, children, and that's where all the really fun activities take place. It makes for great photos. However, we need to be clear in our minds about how to use those correctly. We'll talk a little bit about defamation, confidentiality, and the invasion of privacy, copyright infringement, the problem of sexually explicit communication with minors, and adverse employment decisions. All right. That is very, very strange because my screen does not normally look like that, and I have to apologize. Let me read this to you because it's absolutely unreadable on our screen right now. Like I said, I do apologize for that. Cyber risks, though. The main cyber risks are exposure of personal data, manipulation of records, electronic media, intellectual property, fraudulent money transfers, and third-party damages. It's sometimes I hear from churches that they don't think that they really experience cyber risks, that this is not a challenge for them at a local church with a small congregation. It really is something to take a little more seriously. This is not something that just affects the large organizations like Target. That's the very big case that's been in the news, or was not too long ago. All right, so what are some of the things we can do to make a difference at our local church, right? So here's one thing: limit access to the church's webpage. You need to establish administration access so only a few key people can update the website and make changes to it. And of course, key to that is having secure passwords and using really good security for the credentials of the website. That needs to be cared for very, very carefully. And also, as you know, the volunteers responsible for these things change over time. I know our church just voted in different positions, different people into the positions. The transitions need to be taken care of very carefully so that passwords are updated, information is passed from one generation of volunteers to the next. Very important to do. Why is website security so important? I wish I fully understood why hackers want to hack our websites and why they care about even small websites, but they do. I watched recently as just an absolutely devastating attack was done on our website. They never gained access into the website, but they gave our website such a barrage of an attack that it slowed it down to basically unusable. Why would they do this? I wish I knew. I don't know, but they certainly did do it, and it caused us a great deal of grief as people were. It was very, very difficult to update the website at that time and very difficult to use the website at that time. So, if they're willing to do that and not even gain access, just be careful that they are looking to gain access to websites and then they can use that as a way to route information around the web. All right. Also, limit access by staff to the church's network. So if you have a small network at your church, perhaps the pastor's office and the other administration at the church have perhaps an office or two, a computer or two, it's important to control and limit that access. Churches gather and store reams of sensitive personal information on members. There's the directory. And then there, of course, perhaps much more sensitive is the information related to the giving practices, right? So given those two pieces of information and connecting those dots, a hacker begins to be able to put together quite a bit of information about an individual, and they can use that for identity theft as well. So it is important, even at the local church, to secure the networks very, very carefully. It should be noted, actually, that most data breaches, such as identity theft and embezzlement of funds, occur from the inside. So be sure your church staff only has access to areas of the network that are appropriate for their leadership level. So if you do not need access to the treasury and accounting parts of the data, then making sure that there's a segmentation of areas is very important to do. It is also recommended that you keep two networks, one for general use by your ministry leaders and volunteers, and then a separate one for, say, your daily staff and administration, like your pastors who are actually there every day working from that office. Um, and they should be firewalled with strong passwords in place, and you need to change those in a systematic way that makes sense. Which also means keeping everybody up to date who needs to know what the access is. But this is one of the areas that really is of the greatest benefit of actually keeping passwords, systems passworded, well passworded, and keeping that up to date. All right, let's move on to a screen that you can actually read. So there we go. Litigation discovery. This is just a quick note to remind you that attorneys are using more and more social media as their first stop in building a case. I see so many stories on the news of officers simply checking the someone's social media feed, and they've basically bragged about where they were, and it did not. It was not the same as what they told the police or the attorneys, and so their story was of no effect. Um, Obviously, we would certainly hope that you're not involved in anything that would cause you to be of interest to the police. But churches can be involved in legal disputes, and you need to make sure that the activities that are taking place on your social media channels um, are intentionally what needs to be said on behalf of your organization. So you do not want to be posting things that shouldn't be there at all. Identifying minors. Church websites and Facebook pages often share personally identifiable information which an outsider can use to contact a minor. Um, you need to really be careful about this, especially churches. We have all these great kids' activities, and it's tempting to take lots of pictures and post the kids up there. Um, and that is a lot of fun to do. However, we need to be aware that this does expose children not only to predators, but perhaps also non-custodial biological parents who may be trying to contact their children against court orders. Protect minors by never posting birth dates, phone numbers, email address, or any identifying information. Um, Always seek written permission from people to post their photograph if possible, and uh, from the parents of children if it is of a child. Um, Someone asked me once, isn't a church a private place and I should have an expectation of privacy inside of a church? Uh, I would imagine that the laws about this vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. However, from the brief investigation that I did, it was in fact not considered a private place, so you do not have an expectation of privacy. So if there were people taking photographs to post on the website, that is legally okay. But here's what I would really encourage: good common courtesy and sense. If somebody says, "Hey, I don't want my child's photograph up there," just having a legal right is not worth it in that case. Please oblige. Um, Take those photos down. Don't post them up in the first place if at all possible. And secure permission, because everyone will feel better about that. This is something that I think we all need to take quite a bit more seriously. Defamation, confidentiality, and the invasion of privacy. as we're running, social media and websites and all of these kinds of things, it is possible, because we're all humans, for internal disputes to occur. And it seems as though, especially in email and on social media commenting, there is something gets lost in translation fairly frequently, or maybe we just feel more confident to be a little bit more biting in our comments um, when it's in the digital world rather than in person. So if an internal dispute does occur, any disparaging comments about individuals posted online by church staff may be considered defamation, putting the church at risk for a lawsuit. It is really important to avoid any disclosure of private facts about people or situations unless you have permission from them. And certainly never post anything that might be confidential without checking first. Um, Churches must have a gatekeeper if they have a blog. Blogs that include comment fields are becoming a minefield for defamation, libel, and slander. Churches also need to consider implementing guidelines for leaders who publish personal blogs, including a disclaimer that their views are their own and not the views of the church where they lead. What we're saying here basically is that if the church has a church blog, and say there are maybe 2 or 3 contributors to that, either volunteers or pastors, it is really good practice to have sort of a set of guidelines in place. And I'm going to go over that in much more detail here in a minute. That sort of set the expected behaviors for what can be posted, what can't be posted, in what spirit everything should be written. There's an interesting breed of people on the internet called trolls, and they're hard to understand, but they are people who just actively try to cause conflict. And if you're not familiar with this, this is not a mythological thing. It's a very real thing. There are a lot of people out there who just try to cause fuss out there. So if you are going to be managing this kind of like a blog or comments on a website or on social media, very important to be aware of the fact that some people are just trying to cause a problem, and you never want to respond in an emotionally reactive state. So that we'll talk about a little bit more about the policy guidelines, that how to build those. All right, copyright. I actually went ahead and made a short video to accompany this webinar a couple weeks ago just on copyright. So I will post that in the with the recording after this presentation is over. I'll also post the slides as well to our website. But so I encourage you to watch that version, the video version of this slide, the copyright slide. Let me just give you the brief overview, though. It is against the law to use articles, photos, music, or any type of media. And I think this is where people get a little confused, is what constitutes media. And it can include things like poetry. Actually, we've had not too long ago a lawsuit that Adventist Risk Management had to become involved in because the church just went ahead and used a bit of poetry without seeking permission. So it does apply to any type of media. And you just can't use these things without permission. And it's not enough to just quote, cite the source in it. Citing a source is not permission at all, right? So if in your bulletin you want to have, song lyrics or a poem or a photograph, you really do need to have a license or permission in order to use that. So how do you get licenses and permission? Most churches are actively using an organization called CCLI for your music. If you have your words projected up on the screens, or if you're doing any copying of music for the various musicians, you are very likely doing that through CCLI. They provide, I think it's purchased on a yearly basis or whatever, uh, licenses for music. But here's the thing to keep in mind is that there are different types of licenses. So if you get a license for the sheet music, that may be a different license than, say, oh, we're going to be streaming our service, and so that is another creation, using that music, that copyrighted music. Well, guess what? You're going to need to have the correct license in place for the streaming version as well. And that's really easily available through CCLI. And I believe there are some other organizations, but CCLI seems really oriented to worship and worship music, Christian music that we tend to use in our churches. As far as photographs go, it's pretty simple. If you don't own it, then you need to get permission or buy a license for it. There are stock agencies where you can buy images or buy the rights to use images. There's things like iStock, Getty Images, and then there are also royalty free, where you pay a one-time fee for just a whole library of stuff that you then have access to. And there are images out there that are in the public domain, but you need to be able to document the fact that they are public domain. And that is sometimes a bit more tricky to do. So if you can't document that you have permission, I would encourage you to find something else, or find a way to obtain permission. I recently worked on a project for a brochure that we wanted to produce, and we found a really great image, and we believed actually pretty clearly that it was available for us to use. But we did a little more digging and discovered that it wasn't necessarily. Talked to the photographer directly, and we were able to buy a license to use that image. They were happy to license the image to us, and we were really happy about that because it's a really great image. But you do have to go through the right steps, and if you don't, they can pretty easily bring a case against you. Now, there's the flip side of that. If you're creating content, you also need to protect your content. So for pastors, working leaders, worship leaders, and other leaders who are creating original works, such as sermons, songs, curriculum for training discussions, small groups, and whatnot, and you want to retain copyright to your work, be sure to create these works outside of normal work hours using your own computer. Otherwise, absent a contract, original works are likely to be owned by the church and not the individual. So that's something to bear in mind. And of course, documenting the creation of materials can be very helpful as well, if you ever need to prove that you created it. So let's talk about probably the most important tool that you have to run your church media program safely. There's actually a few different components, but we're going to talk about the social media policy as sort of the backbone of this. All right. So the social media policy, I have several slides here with these different points on it, and I can make this list available to you as sort of a worksheet that you can use to build from. You'll have to apologize. I do have a bit of a scratchy throat here today, so if I'm coughing a little bit or sounding a bit funny, that's what's going on with me. All right, here we go. Social media policy. Number 1, remind employees and volunteers to familiarize themselves with the employee volunteer agreement and policies included in the employee volunteer handbook. Of course, this applies a bit more to if you are an employer scenario. You may not have a volunteer handbook at your church, although I think the church does have an overall handbook that could be referenced. Um, but if you're not in a local church situation, maybe you're at an academy or college or a different type of organization, you definitely want to tie this into the handbook. Number two, you should state that the policy applies to multimedia social networking websites, blogs, and wikis for both professional and personal use. Um, this has become a really interesting situation as social media has exploded and you have personalities working for organizations. They represent the organization, but then at some point maybe they move on and decide to work somewhere else. Who owns the material that that say that Twitter account that they used on behalf of their organization, right? So maybe it was John um, at whatever their organization was. So it is a personal in a sense thing, but it's also very much representing, and the content that he was providing had to do with that organization specifically. So what you're asking them to do is, whether it's personal or for professional use, on behalf of your organization, you want to make that very, very clear. And you're going to need to ask them to make it clear as well. So on their Twitter account, they might say, I I also work at this church, and my my opinions and statements are my own, and do not represent them necessarily. Those kinds of comments are pretty easy to find the language for, and the point being basically just to provide a little clarity and separation when necessary. All right. Number three, internet postings should not disclose any information that is confidential or proprietary to the organization or to any third party that has disclosed information to the organization. Again, that's maybe not something that is super specific to churches, but it can be. It certainly can be. But various organizations, definitely, this is something that you want to keep in mind. Uh, and you should include, even if you don't see how that would be applied to your organization specifically, because next thing you know is it will apply and you won't have it in there and you'll wish you did. Number four, if an employee or volunteer comments on any aspect of the organization's business, they must clearly identify themselves as an employee volunteer and include a disclaimer, which is what I was really referencing earlier as well. The views expressed are mine alone and do not necessarily reflect the views of the organization. Number five, internet postings should not include organization logos or trademarks unless permission is asked for and granted. Again, this just goes to that basic principle that I've been mentioning now of making it very clear, is this the organization that's speaking right now? Or is this somebody who may be associated with the organization but is not speaking on the organization's behalf or is not authorized to do so? Or are they speaking as themselves as opposed to as the organization? Number six, internet postings must respect copyright, privacy, fair use, financial disclosure, and other applicable laws. This is a no-brainer. It's basically telling your employees and volunteers that they have to obey the law. It's important to have that in there. Number seven, employees should neither claim nor imply that they are speaking on the company's behalf. Eight, organization blogs, Facebook pages, Twitter accounts, etc. could require approval when the employee volunteer is posting about the organization and the industry. There are times when, as individuals, you do want to interact in discussions that reference the organization as a whole. You may be wanting to talk about, about your church in a discussion, and that can be a very, very positive thing to do. Um, depending on the sensitivity of the nature of the discussion, though, you may want to define at what point do you want to be people to be speaking. Um, this may be a good point to actually reference crisis communication. When there is a crisis, people are often very inspired to speak on an organization's behalf because they have some knowledge of the facts, or at least a perception of the facts. So, in good crisis communication management, you try to drive all questions and discussions to one spokesperson. So you really want to discourage everyone from talking about the organization, even though they are, they think they have the right information. They're speaking in defense of your organization. What you really want is to make sure that all discussion points are going through one single spokesperson. So this type of policy point allows you to really kind of enforce the fact that no, we don't want you speaking about or discussing these points right now. We want all of this driven through our spokesperson, um, so that exactly the right message is out there consistently on point, saying what the verifiable facts that you as an organization have agreed to. Number 9, that the organization reserves the right to request that certain subjects are avoided, may withdraw certain posts, and remove inappropriate comments. Because unfortunately, that can take place where it's necessary. All right. So, what are some proactive steps we can take? And again, here's one of those slides where my very bright white text is decided to appear as black, which is not helpful at all to you. Let me read this to you. The proactive steps we can take are creating a social media policy, much like what I've just described, and that's just a guide. It's not certainly not everything you could do. One of the things that I'd certainly encourage you to include in your social media policy is more behavioral oriented guidelines. This is the principles and behaviors we expect. The positives of we are always looking to interact with people in a positive manner. We are always looking to, our church is a family oriented church. We want to mention family and how whatever they're asking about relates to family as often as possible. Those are the kind of guidelines you can include in there. It helps people understand how to share the same message in an effective way. The next item here that you can probably not read very well is implement safeguards, right? So, what we're talking about there is making sure your networks are firewalled, passworded effectively, that your users, the employees and volunteers who have computers that are using your network, have their devices passworded. And that sensitive information isn't being transported in a mobile fashion. You don't want to have a laptop out there with a lot of personally identifying information of, say, your church congregation, especially maybe related to their giving, out on a laptop, and that laptop gets stolen, picked up, left, lost, anything like that. You really want to avoid that scenario. So take extra steps to make sure that that's not possible. And here's probably my favorite area, and that's training. Training is one of the most proactive things you can do. Creating the guidelines and the policy is probably the backbone of your safety plan here, but training people and making sure that they understand the policy and that they are aware of what they should be doing and how to do it effectively um, is the other side of that. And it's a very, very important piece of the puzzle. You don't want to leave people wondering how to get things done or what they should or should not do in a given situation. And of course, the last point here is monitoring and oversight. It is really, really important that while you don't want to have a lot of people um, actively involved in your social media as far as speaking on your organization's behalf, posting blogs, you want a limited number of people doing that so that it's not just a wide open circus. But at the same time, you do want to have a few people who have the ability to oversee and when something goes out onto the web that it has been reviewed and that an extra pair of eyes has been over that material before it goes public, um, which is just a really good practice to keep your organization safe. All right, I think I'm going to end here before we get on to anything related to crisis communication because we've gone well over time. If there are any questions, this would be a great time to type them into the question and answer box. I will be happy to address anything that comes in there, or at least direct you to an expert who may be able to help. Um, Let me just say a bit about crisis communication as potentially another topic that we could do. I'd like to hear from you. Is anybody interested in hearing about crisis communication at the local church in an upcoming webinar? Is this a good topic for us to pursue? What we're talking about is crises can take many forms, and you may um, some of the things you need to do is have a very well defined message. You need to have worked with your administration and also appointed a spokesperson before you ever have a crisis to deal with. Um, you need to know when to escalate this to your conference or union to get their assistance in helping to manage the situation. Um, and also, there are some tools that we could provide related to social media because the interesting thing with social media is that the story is going to be told whether you're telling it or not. So how do you keep track of what is being said out there? Um, and there are tools for that, and also there are great tools for getting your message out there as well, so that it can be your ministry can stay protected without just falling prey to the to this one isolated incident. All right, here we go. I have some questions, so let's take a look at these. Does permission needed in printed newsletters also? I get icons from free downloadable clip art, etc. Use of pictures of children in our school and church activities need permission of all parents. Thank you. Well, again, that permission issue is um, it's not absolutely black and white because churches are considered public areas. No one has a particular right to privacy. However, it is also very frequently the case that people don't want their images used. So, when possible, what I would do is let everyone know that you will be taking lots of pictures and they will be in the newsletter. Just make it pretty clear, talk to the parents. Um, for a printed newsletter, it tends to have a much smaller circulation and potential circulation. It's what gets handed out at church, and that's about it. So um, it seems like something that you can certainly get that kind of permission a little more easily as well. Go in there, talk to the different leaders of the different divisions or the youth activities, whatever it is that you're photographing, and just say, "Hey, I'm going to be taking some photographs. I need permission from people. Um, can you ask for that as they drop their kids off or whatever?" And if anybody's got a problem with it, let me know which kids I shouldn't be taking photographs of or not using photographs of, um, because it can be really really difficult to get permission every time you take a photograph. But I think you can use sort of wider sweeping ways to get that done. just bear in mind, some people will surprise you, and they really don't want that done. So be sure you respect that when that's when they prefer for you to not use their image or their child's image. I've had people come up to me requesting that I not do that, and they didn't necessarily communicate that in a really pleasant, clear way right away. But anyway, we got there, and I certainly wasn't, bound and determined to use their child's image. It was just, uh, just be ready for some interesting interactions. And remember, yeah, hey, you're adding value by doing what you're doing, but also don't 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 get stuck on it. If they don't want you to do that and they're upset, don't make them more upset. Just placate them and move on. There's plenty of things to take pictures of. All right, moving on. How can we get a copy of this information to share with the AV team at church? Just a hard copy would be good. Oh, thank you. What we're going to do, I'm going to fix whatever's wrong with the slide we're looking at right now. And I will provide this as a PDF as well as the social media as a Word document, the social media policy part. And I have a short, I think it's 90-second video about copyright specifically that I'll share as well as the recording of this presentation, which will be posted on our YouTube channel. So that should cover them, and if they can view this in one or more of those ways. All right. What if leadership, pastors, etc., reject creating a digital media? I'm thinking you mean policy. That's a potential challenge if they really just don't see the light of it. However, I think in my experience that's not typically the case. I'm not aware of people who resist doing things well or using best practices. In my experience, most people are really welcome any contributing leader who says, "Hey, you know what? We can really make this better," and take a positive approach of, "You know what? We can do our social media in this way to reach these kinds of people, and if we use this kind of policy to back it up, it will protect our volunteers, and we will, we'll all be safer because of it." It isn't too hard to make a really good case for protecting the organization and the pastors. Typically, um, I have heard of people resisting that kind of thinking, which is always surprising to me. We'll certainly pray for those individuals, but it's not common, I would say. Is there a basic digital media standard required by conferences, local or general? What a great question. I really wish there was a basic digital media standard required. I'm not aware of a standard required, but I think what I need to do then is also double check in the North American Division manual, which they continually update, and see where we are as far as social media policies and digital media standards. If I'm not mistaken, though, it would be very much along the lines of what we've presented here today. Does the permission need to always be in writing? Our newsletter is also given to some members with internet use. How does that affect this? Well, it just means that as you are presenting these materials now in a digital format, they now have the potential to go a lot farther. And copying, duplicating, it takes on a whole different potential scale, right? So if you hand somebody a piece of paper at church, the odds are that that's as far as that's going to go. I mean, technically, they could go copy it, photocopy it, and share it with someone else, but that's unlikely. But you give it to somebody as a PDF or in an email, and it's much easier to just hit forward on to more people. And especially when it comes to the non-custodial biological parents, we've definitely experienced more than one scenario where um, there were parents, non-custodial parents, actively trying to access information about their children um, using these kinds of methods. So if they could find out, hey, were there photographs from the Pathfinder event this weekend or whatever, and they're trying to see was my kid there. They want to know what they're doing, where they are. And while that sounds sympathetic, there can be some very good reasons why those parents do not have access to their children. So what am I saying here? Does permission need to always be in writing? I think it's better in writing. Absolutely. That's your best case scenario. Are you comfortable with less than that? I wouldn't recommend it, but at the same time, how identifiable is the child in the image? If it's a big shot of a whole bunch of people, in the congregation, it's up for you to decide. We can't define that for you, but the risks go up the less documentation and the more identifiable people are in the imagery. Can you send that PDF file to us that signed up? Oh, so for folks that have signed up for the webinar, would you like to have the PDF file of this presentation? We can do that. Absolutely. I can send you the PDF file as well as a link to the copyright video and the Word document as well. That is definitely something I can do. I hope you found this presentation to be of value. I would still like to hear if you folks would be interested in a presentation on crisis communication. I think it's a really important area personally, but would like to gauge the interest in the topic as well. That does draw us to the conclusion of our presentation here today. If you do have additional questions, I'm going to skip ahead to the end of the presentation here. We have some more about the crisis communication. But if you do have questions, here's my contact information. You'll see my email address there. It is dfournier@adventistrisk.org. So if you have additional questions, don't hesitate to contact me directly, and I'll be happy to do my best to help you out. Also, let me back up just one slide here, if I can. There we go. I forget who put this out. I know it's available at Advent Source, but there's this collection of 4 small books that I do highly recommend. There's the Crisis Communication Bootcamp, or Crisis Bootcamp. That is a really, really fantastic read and it's by a colleague of mine who's up here at the Columbia Union, and whose name is escaping me just this particular moment because I need her name. I will think of it just the second I sign off. But anyway, also media outreach, how to get your story in the media, mobile ministry, and social media. These are really, really great guides, and they're available from adventsource.org. I was really looking for resources when I was asked to help out with communications at my church. I really, really wish that I had these resources when I started out. This would have just been fantastic. So something to point your communications and media ministry folks towards as well. All right. Well, I think that we've gone on far too long today. Send me a note if you would, if you have more questions to ask, and otherwise I'll be sending out an email to all of you with the presentation and the other resources I referenced. And with that, I want to say thank you for your participation. It's been great talking to all of you, and I hope we can talk to you again next time in about a month's time. We'll do this again. Thank you so much. Bye.